Hey everyone, this is Chapter 5 of My Alien Roommate Wants Offspring, Book 1 of the Seven Star Concordance universe. I wrote these first 5 chapters as a test to see if people will actually vibe with Dave and Zalina's story. I've got the full idea and final confrontation lined up for the conclusion of Book 1 and several other stories in this universe ready to be written. But whether this book gets finished and the others get written depends on you. If you're enjoying this series so far, please drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. The more support these videos get, the more time I can invest in finishing book 1 and keep the series going at a faster pace. Since YouTube will start paying the bills. I really appreciate your support so far. Now, Chapter 5, Aether Clash Lockdown Protocol. Friday evening found them still at the house, the kitchen table transformed into a makeshift strategy session. Dave sat across from Zalina, sore muscles protesting every shift in his chair while she studied his Aether Clash binder with focused intensity. She had spent much of the day referencing his various decks to understand the game's core mechanics and flow, but the cards, now laid out in precise rows, followed her own distinct logic. "You favor resource denial and slow inevitability," she observed, deliberately noting several of his preferred control pieces. "I have adapted a different approach that suits me. Strike-oriented, rapid disruption, followed by overwhelming board dominance. It's high-risk, high-reward sequencing, but it should prove successful." Dave leaned back, watching her work with open appreciation. "You've been at this all day, building that strike deck from scratch while I was stuck in audits. Should be interesting seeing how it goes against the other decks tonight." Indeed. Zalina's long chrome platinum ponytail shifted as she leaned forward, cyan markings pulsing faintly along her forearms while she considered threat vectors and timing windows. She selected cards with decisive movements, building around aggressive bursts and decisive finishing combinations that mirrored boarding pod assault patterns she actually performed. "Your decks provided an excellent reference for rules and pacing. My configuration prioritizes initiative and decisive engagement. It should prove adequate against any approach." He grinned, despite the lingering burn in his quads from that morning's training. It's just casual Friday night, right? Not a ranked tournament or anything." Zalina paused, a card in between her fingers. "Every engagement is an assessment," she said, then tilted her head slightly, the words echoing back at her. "I said the same on the mini-golf course. I treated that as a dominance ritual and nearly turned our date into a war game." Her markings pulsed once, soft cyan, almost reflective. "You taught me the value of adjusting parameters for the intended objective. Fun, not conquest. I will endeavor to remember that lesson tonight." Dave's grin softened into something warmer. "Hey, look at you, participating in the joy of human inefficiency." She slid the final card into the sleeve with a soft click, then closed the deck box. The resulting build was neat, professional, and clearly her style. Aggressive, efficient, and informed by a commander's mindset. "I am ready." Dave pushed himself up with a theatrical groan. "All right, Commander, let's get you to the shop. I think you're going to have fun." She inclined her head once. As they prepared to leave, her wrist comm gave a silent, insistent vibration. Dave caught the briefest flash of the display. Priority, House Gultor, Thalcor. Zalina's markings flickered brighter for a half a heartbeat. She silenced it with a precise tap, her expression unchanging. "It can wait," she said simply. Dave raised an eyebrow but let it go. "Ready to be inefficient," she said, the corner of her mouth curving up, just the smallest hint. The local card shop, Mom's Basement, occupied a modest corner unit in a strip mall. Its windows glowing warm with light and game posters. The smell of fresh cardboard, dry erase markers, and faintly stale energy drinks greeted them as they stepped inside. Several tables were occupied, but the back area where the card players usually gathered was already lively. Heads turned the moment Zalina entered behind Dave, at her full height with her gunmetal gray skin catching the overhead lights in shifting teal violet silver gleams and the faint cyan pulse of her war glow markings. She immediately drew attention. Mike, the sarcastic IT guy who organized most Friday nights, froze mid-shuffle. "Holy crap, Dave, you actually brought her." Jen, the enthusiastic lore nerd, leaned over the table with bright eyes. "Wait," Is that the strike commander from the mini golf pictures? Dave offered a sheepish grin, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, everyone, this is Zalina. Zalina, meet the crew. Mike, Jen, Carlos, and the rest of the regulars. Play nice, or at least pretend to. Zalina inclined her head with precise courtesy. It is a pleasure to meet you all. I have prepared a strike-oriented deck for tonight. It will be interesting to test its effectiveness against your own strategies. A beat of stunned silence followed. Carlos let out a low chuckle. Damn, straight to business. I like it. While the group made room at their usual table, Zalina's gaze drifted to a small display near the counter holding basic store apparel, mostly logo tees and simple tanks. She paused, head tilting slightly. Black is optimal for low visibility and durability, she thought. It has served me through hundreds of operations. Yet her eyes lingered on a deep violet tank with a subtle stylized galaxy swirl design. The color reminded her of the shifting iridescence in her own skin under certain lighting, teal bleeding into violet, and the way Dave's eyes had lingered on her markings during their quieter moments. Inefficient for tactical use. However, this is not a tactical environment. The realization carried a faint echo of the mini-golf course, where Dave had gently corrected her from dominance to play. She reached out, fingers brushing the fabric. It was softer than it looked, comfortable even, completely unnecessary for combat. She picked it up anyway. Dave watched with quiet curiosity as she paid with a quick scan from her wrist comm and disappeared into the small restroom area to change. When she returned, the new deep violet tank had replaced her previous black one. The color caught the iridescent sheen of her skin beautifully and made the cyan glow of her markings stand out in a softer, almost decorative way. Dave's eyebrows rose appreciatively. That looks really good on you. Zalina glanced down at herself, then back at him. It felt appropriate for the occasion, she said simply. The cyan fractals along her forearms pulsed once with quiet self-consciousness. Jen leaned in with an excited grin. Oh, that design was inspired by the Dravok home system. See? Their primary star is the brightest one with the swirl, right there on the left. It looks amazing with your skin tone. Zalina blinked, glancing down at the subtle galaxy pattern again. She hadn't noticed the specific stellar reference when she chose it. A faint, warmer pulse traveled along her markings. Interesting, she murmured. They settled in for a 4-player free-for-all. Dave shuffled his familiar lockdown control deck and sat back, content to let the table breathe around Zalina's energy. She set out her strike-oriented configuration with crisp, decisive movements, and her new violet tank catching the light every time she reached for a card. The early game belonged to her. Zalina struck fast and clean, her disruption pieces ripping through Mike's early development and forcing Carlos onto the defensive. Your resource allocation is overextended, she told Mike directly, removing a key threat with surgical precision. Mike threw his hands up in mock defeat. Jen laughed as she watched. Zalina's cyan markings pulsed steadily, focused and in command. Dave watched from the other side of the table, playing his own slow lockdown pieces with focused intent. He was genuinely trying to win, but he guided the flow subtly, dropping quiet suggestions that kept Mike and Carlos focused on Zalina's threats without making it obvious. When Zalina declared, "Attacking Dave can wait for later," the table fell briefly silent. Mike and Carlos exchanged a knowing glance, both clearly recognizing the tactical error, but neither spoke. Dave simply offered a small knowing smile as he continued building his inevitable board. Midway through a tense turn, her wrist comm vibrated firmly against the table. Zalina's markings flickered with irritation. She silenced it without looking, eyes locked on the board instead. The game tightened. Mike mounted a clever counterattack, and Carlos began stabilizing. Zalina leaned forward, calculating. Dave spoke softly from his side of the table. You don't have to answer everything yourself, Zalina. Let someone else take the heat by taking a step back. Zalina paused, a card steady in her hand. Her markings pulsed once in conflict. The play she was considering was aggressive, flashy, and far from optimal. Dave's earlier suggestion echoed in her mind, but she pushed forward anyway. It proved to be too much. The overextension left her vulnerable. Mike capitalized with a perfectly timed combo that neatly neutralized Dave's careful setup, and suddenly the board shifted. Zalina's remaining forces were overwhelmed in the final turns. When the last points were tallied, Mike had won. The table erupted in good-natured cheers and groans. Mike leaned back with a triumphant grin. Jen clapped. Carlos offered a respectful nod. Good game, Commander. You had us on the ropes most of that match. Zalina sat very still for a moment, staring at the final board state. The loss was not significant. It was only a casual game. But it landed like an echo. In her mind flashed a memory, a boarding action 3 cycles ago where she had refused to delegate a critical flank to Vren. She had carried the entire sector herself. The cost had been 2 warriors who never made it back to the pod. Victory had come, but at a price she still carried to this day. If I had entrusted the flank to Vren that day. The thought came unbidden, followed immediately by the pastor's voice from Sunday. Come to me when you're weary. Let someone else carry the weight for a while. She exhaled once, controlled. The cyan markings along her collarbones dimmed slightly. Mike leaned back in his chair with a satisfied grin, stretching his arms overhead. Phew, that was a solid game. Zalina, you were straight up terrifying for the first half. I thought you were going to run the table. Jen laughed, nodding vigorously. No kidding. I kept looking at the board like, yep, they're dead. But then when Carlos needed to deal with Dave, he couldn't because he was dealing with you. Carlos gave a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Yeah, guy barely looked like he was doing anything. But every time I tried to take care of Dave, my stuff was busy with Zalina. Sneaky bastard. Zalina turned her head slowly towards Dave, amber eyes narrowing slightly in reassessment. You appeared passive, yet they speak of you as the primary threat. Dave rubbed the back of his neck, a sheepish but pleased smile tugging at his mouth. That's the strategy. Let everyone else burn resources fighting each other while I quietly take away their options. I wasn't trying to beat everyone in this game, just the last one. Zalina studied him for a long moment, her markings pulsing with quiet interest. For the first time she saw the strategic patience in him, not as simple caution, but as a deliberate and formidable doctrine in its own right. Interesting, she murmured. I believe I underestimated the value of such restrained inevitability. A few more matches later, they said their goodbyes and got some takeout on the way home. Nothing fancy, just oversized sandwiches and steak fries. Back at the house, Dave headed straight for the couch with his food. Zalina disappeared into her room to change. A few minutes later, she emerged in loose sleeping clothes, but she had carefully draped the new violet shirt over the back of a chair instead of putting it away. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the shirt. Then, her wrist comm vibrated again, louder, more insistent. This time, she didn't silence it and opened the message. A hollow recording of Strike Major Vrenthal Kor appeared above her comm, tall and imposing even in projection. His cyan markings were sharper and more angular than hers, his posture parade ground perfect, his voice was deep, clipped, and laced with haughty disbelief. Strike Commander Galtor, I have reviewed the latest compatibility metrics, 99.1% with the human Harlan. A statistical anomaly I refuse to accept without confirmation. House Command may entertain this novelty, but we both know what true synergy looks like. My own rating stands at 98.7%, and our battlefield record speaks louder than any algorithm. I have secured accelerated leave and will arrive in Terran space within 72 hours. I intend to evaluate this pairing personally. Prepare yourself, Zalina. Some matches are simply too good to be true. I look forward to correcting this error. The recording ended with a crisp, arrogant salute. Zalina's markings blazed bright cyan with conflict and something sharper. Anger, protectiveness, and a quiet refusal. He assumes the trial is already lost. He is wrong. The thought came unbidden. She paused, surprised at the strength of her own internal response. She exhaled slowly, the glow of her markings slowly dimming but not fading completely. From the living room, Dave's voice carried down the hall, warm and casual. Zalina, food's getting cold. Come eat before I finish yours too. She looked toward the sound. Dave sat on the couch, happily munching on his oversized sandwich, completely unaware of the storm heading their way. A quiet certainty settled in her chest. Inefficient, illogical, and yet undeniable. This was no longer just an assessment. She wanted this. And that's the end of Chapter 5. If you want to see what happens next with Dave and Zalina, especially with Vren showing up in the next 3 days to test them, the best way to make that happen is to demolish that like button. Drop a comment telling me your favorite part or what direction you hope the story will take, and subscribe to the 7 Star Concordance. The more support this series gets, the faster I can finish Book 1 and introduce you to the other 6 members of the Concordance. The Dravok are just one. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate every single one of you. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next chapter.